Thank you, Cara. Well, for a small island as the UK is, there's been an awful lot happening here over the last few years. And we're really struggling a bit to work out how to best tell the story of what's happened in just one very short chapter. But I rather suspect, given the broad geographic area all the authors are having to cover, that we're all going to be in a bit of the same boat. So what we're aiming to do in the TERF Island chapter is to look a little bit at some of the individuals, some of the campaigns, some of the legal cases that have taken place and that have, as far as possible, been milestones that have moved the story forwards, because a lot of women, there's so many women, for example, who've taken legal cases which are really interesting, but aren't necessarily making a new legal point. So in that example, we would be trying to look at the ones where the law has been clarified in some way or another. Of course, because I'm writing the chapter, there's always going to be something on lesbians, but also because in this context, I think it's really important. Lesbians have been facing the impact of gender identity ideology for a very, very long time. We've been fighting the incursion of men claiming to be lesbians, in inverted commas, claiming to be lesbians since certainly the 1980s. I think before the sort of bigger, more generic movements sprung up and other women became aware of it. So I think that's an important part of the story. And another group that we're very keen to mention, it kind of relates back to what Peter Blackbird was saying about the women online who are mostly anonymous, is the enormous army of anonymous women that have been involved in the campaign in the UK. I think actually, to be fair, around the whole world. And the truth of the matter is that no matter how successful the big campaigns, the names that we've all heard of, none of that would have been possible without the hundreds of thousands of women, writing to their MPs, handing out leaflets on street corners, tweeting, whatever it is that they've been doing. So many women have made a really important contribution, which is, I think, absolutely the backbone of what's helped us to make some progress here in the UK. So on the legal cases, I mean, a lot of you will be familiar with, for example, and probably a lot of the readers as well, with the big legal cases like, for Women Scotland, that defined the meaning of sex as biological, Maya Forstater's case, which said that it's worthy of respect in a democratic society to hold the view that it's impossible to change sex, and Kira Bell's case about puberty blockers. And of course, that's a story that's running currently again as the UK government's trying to start up a new, or the NHS is trying to start a new puberty blocker trial in the UK almost as we speak. So we'll also try to include some of the less well-known cases as well, such as Rachel Mead, who was really important because that was the first time that a regulatory body was brought into the legal frame. So she sued not just Westminster Council, which was her employer, but also her governing body, the Social Work England, which had also sanctioned her for tweeting gender critical remarks. And Alison Bailey, you'll all be familiar with the big case of Alison Bailey with the taking her chambers to court, but maybe not so many of you also know that she took quite recently, actually, just a few months ago, took a case against her veterinary surgery because she discovered that she had been deregistered when she took her pet along to get it treated at the vets. She discovered they deregistered her because somebody didn't like her gender critical views, and she took them to court and she won. And that's really, really important because it's the first time that the whole principle of For Women Scotland has been applied in the provision of goods and services. So the other group that we're going to look at, hopefully, is children. And I'm going to hand over to Julia and ask her to speak about that.
Okay, thanks, Sally. Yeah, before I speak about children, I just wanted to kind of echo a bit of what you were saying there, Sally, in terms of the challenge of I mean, it's a great challenge to have, the fact that there's just been such a huge amount of activity and resistance going on here over really, many years now, and to try and sort of capture as much as possible of that. Obviously, the brief is to document the women who've been involved and document the achievements. Um, at the same time, obviously, you want to write something that's going to be engaging and readable, and not just because you could just literally do a list of a list of all the different names, all the different groups, all the different activities, and still not cover all of it. So I think that has been a challenge, and it'd be interesting to hear what the other authors have to say about that. That's certainly been something I've found really challenging, to try and document as much as possible, but still make it readable and engaging. And probably everyone here knows there is this, you can't see it very well there, the TERF Island book by Fiona McAnena. And the way that she's set that book up, structured that book, is to center it around four very key women and their associated campaigns and actions. And that book's I think it's about 250 odd pages. And obviously she's had to be very selective even in that. It's really is very challenging for us. So I think we've taken an approach to cover as much ground as we can, but also just to acknowledge there's no way we can name every single woman involved, or even evaluate the impact of so many different women, when so many women actually are anonymous, and it's impossible to know everyone's names. So I think we've tried to select indicative, illustrative examples that help to tell the story, whilst capturing, as I say, as much of that collective struggle as we can. So yeah, so some of the bits that I was writing, one just I know Cara was very clear that this is important, was a bit about the early years. We're starting kind of really from the Gender Recognition Act in 2004, particularly around about 2012, with the first of the radical feminist conferences that were absolutely besieged by the trans activists. I think a lot of women aren't aware in this country of just how early that started, with venues pulling out and all of that kind of thing. Um, but yeah, to say a bit, because obviously it's very, very topical at the moment. The section on children is particularly topical, because we have the horror of this so-called clinical trial of the effect of puberty blockers on a cohort of young people. And I mean, this was all set out in the Cass review. So I think in some cases there was so much gratitude for the um for the ways in which the Cat Review was very critical of what had been going on. And I think everyone felt that that was a huge victory on our side, that because the practices at the Tavistock, Gender Identity Development Service, were exposed as being, well, very unethical, and a case of ideology usurping appropriate, responsible clinical practice. So I think there was so much uh, there was such a sense of achievement that was finally being recognized. But obviously it was always there that what Cass had proposed was this clinical trial, and that is all now proposed to be sort of getting underway, I think early in the new year. And there's going to be a lot of pushback against that. So it just makes the section on children, I think, particularly pertinent. So clearly probably the most well-known group here is Transgender Trend, who were there very much in those early years. They've just celebrated their 10-year anniversary, which I think is just extremely impressive. And the amount of work, of the amount that they've achieved, and the output in terms of all their publications, their beautiful books for children authored by Rachel Rooney. These really delightful books that act as such an important alternative to the plethora of all the pro-trans books that are aimed at children, the awful, awful books that just basically lie to children. So Transgender Trend has really been so crucial and so central. So I do focus I think quite a bit on their achievements within that section. But I think one of the real revelations for me has been in terms of the section on children has been the extent and scope of the work by so many different groups. I mean, pretty much most. I wasn't aware of all of the groups before I started writing this section, but I was aware of most of them, but probably not in huge detail. So, if we look at the groups that have been set up, there are groups specifically set up by parents to support other parents of children who are confused about whether they're male or female or think they're non-binary or whatever. So there are parent support groups. There are all the different clinical groups, clinical and therapeutic groups, sort of medical, groups of medical practitioners. So there's a whole array of those groups. There are a lot of groups set up to challenge what is happening in schools. And, some of them have websites and are quite, relatively well known in our circles, but some of them are very small, informal local groups that, may not even necessarily have a website or anything like that. And I think those are the main groups. And there's also, this is slightly a different aspect in terms of representing children, but there's a really important and possibly unique group called children of transitioners. So they represent a very, very seldom heard voice of children of men who've transitioned in later life, and all the abuse that they've experienced through being children in those circumstances. I think that's such an important one. But what really struck me when I was kind of trying to get to grips with writing that section and looking at the websites, I have to say I was quite blown away with the extent of the work. So some of the groups that I could mention, groups like Our Duty, the Bayswater support group, some of the others, specifically parents groups. I knew that they existed. I'd met some of the parents at different meetings, parliamentary meetings, other kind of events and actions. But when I saw the websites and saw how much they were doing, it's it even to me, I've been around a long time, and I like to think on the whole, I pretty much, I try to keep abreast of what's happening. But the extent of all of this unpaid, unpaid and often unrecognized labor, it's just incredible. And that was one of the main things that has been a revelation to me, the ways in which parents have supported other parents. It's it's like there's been this kind of like this sort of underground, that whole thing about I can't remember what it's called now, the way that fungi build these I can't remember the name of it now, the name of the networks by which they all communicate underground. I just feel there's so much of that going on in every area, and the one that I'm particularly struck by is the parents. And obviously the parents are going to be, they'll have their own very, very particular sense of urgency and motivation for being involved. So I hope that gives a bit of a flavor. The other thing that I've just been very conscious of as well is uh, how all we can do really is give a sense of the history, and then it has to kind of stop at a certain snapshot in time, because there's like on a weekly basis as we're drafting this, things are happening. It's moving very quickly here, particularly now with with this dreadful proposal for this clinical trial that's going ahead. So I hope that captures something of it for you.
Thanks so much to both of you for that.